welcome to Bookish Brits. I'm Rex, and today I wanted to follow up on the last video I did, which was about books that are my friends. So I noticed, and I'm not sure if any of you noticed, that all the books I picked and all the friends in my books were white women. And I thought, given that we've just done a post on Black Lives Matter and diversity in books is a very prominent topic right now, rightly so, it would be useful for me to talk about some of my thoughts around that. Now, one thing I didn't want to do was change the video or change the books I picked, because those were the ones I picked. And for me, growing up and going to the library and borrowing those books and getting them in the 80s and the early 90s when I was growing up and quite young, those were the books that were available to me. I very rarely, if ever, found books that had people like me in them. And that's not to say they didn't exist, I just didn't come across them. And the first book I really remember, and I had to tweet about this recently, was Earthsea. It was the first book I picked up, especially in fantasy, which is predominantly white, at least all the kind of fantasy I read growing up that was published between the 50s and the 80s and 90s was, yeah, all the characters were white. That was just how it was. And Earthsea was the exception. Earthsea was published in the 70s, at least the first book was. And from the outset, no one is white. It's not until you get later into the book and there's like this particular tribe and they're an antagonist in the story that they are specifically called out as being white, but everyone else in Earthsea is not. And I loved that Guin didn't make a big fuss about the diversity. I mean, she famously said that, well, most of the world isn't white, so why would Earthsea be that way? And I just loved how she owned that narrative. And the books, you know, whether you're a fan, whether you're not a fan, doesn't really matter to me. It was a revelation. It was amazing to finally read a fantasy book, because that is my favourite genre, and find people like me in it. And it wasn't as for tokenism, and it wasn't as a trope. It is just how that world is unapologetically. And that, for me, was amazing. It wasn't until I was a teenager and I started to read things by Alice Walker, and I studied Roll of Thunder, Hear My Cry, and I Know Why the Cage Bird Sings, and I started to read Toni Morrison, that I found, and Amy Tan in particular, that I found people of colour writing about other people of colour. And it felt like, in order to get any people of colour into books, they needed to either be semi-biographical or written by people of colour. And then those books led me to other authors, and you know, my reading has become a lot more diverse since then. But I think we've got a long way to go. I love that you can now get picture flats that have people all types of people in that, and I'm so thrilled to see that, and I'm so happy to see that. And I think we need more of it, because it's a true reflection of the world. I mean, at least for me, I grew up in London, which is an incredibly diverse place, and I've always loved that about London. And it would feel, for me, it wasn't a reflection of reality to not see that. I mean, I guess in other places that's different. You're growing up and you're predominantly surrounded by one ethnicity, or you don't have the multiculturalism that London does. But it felt, for me, it didn't feel real. Often when I would read stuff, especially when they're set in London and everyone's white, I'm like, really? Which bit of London are you in? Because it's not the London I grew up in, and I've lived all over town, and it's never been like that. So I just wanted to call that out, and I wanted to know what, you know, let's hope somebody interacts with me on this video, but I'd love to know other people's thoughts on reading books with diverse characters and how they feel about it, and whether they notice that or they haven't noticed it, or, you know, just anything. Just have a conversation with me. I'm keen to know your thoughts. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel if you'd like to see more videos about books. And if you're worried about missing out, just click on the bell and you'll be notified every time we post a new video. Thanks!